The year is coming to an end and we've finished a lot of really special projects. From very technical gowns to big ball gowns and architectural inspired dresses, we brought so many ideas to life. But with all of that also comes a growing pile of leftover materials. Tulle scraps from underskirts and structural layers, different threads, beads and little remnants that don't quite add up to a full project on their own. And I kept thinking, what if, instead of letting them sit there, as a final project of this year, we combine them and create something new? So let's have a closer look at all the materials I've got that I think could work for this project. The most important thing is I really only got the materials where I think they aren't enough for a single project, and so the challenge here is that I want to put together a lot of different materials and things and create one big thing from it, where each material bit wouldn't be enough for a project in itself. The first thing I got is a lot of tulle. Not only do I have these rolls here, I also have a big box of tulle scraps, and I got this light blue tulle, and you can see it really is just a tiny bit left on this roll. I've got another roll of it that has even less tulle on it. So even if I would combine those, there wouldn't be enough for a tulle skirt. Maybe there would be enough for a bodice, but without a skirt or sleeves, they don't really work for a single project. So this is the first fabric that we can use. The second one is this white tulle. And I'm pretty sure this is also not enough for a tulle skirt. I already had it unrolled when I made this petticoat, and I think I would be able to get one more layer out of it, or maybe two. So we can definitely use this fabric as well. Then I have a bit more tulle of those dark blue. For this, I think it would be possible to make something else from it. But I probably only need a little bit of it, and it would be still enough for something else. So I guess this is fine for this project. And I think I'll need a little bit of it, at least with what I got in mind now. So this is definitely a maybe. And then there are more tulle scraps left, also in this box. This box is just full with tulle scraps, smaller ones, bigger ones. So I put them all away in this box because even though they are too small to make a skirt layer from it, it's still so much fabric and I don't really want to throw it away. So I definitely want to use a lot of this so we can empty the box quite a bit. Every time I can, I want to use this fabric and not this one. So this is everything regarding tulle. I still have more fabrics left. I have a little bit of the silk chiffon left, that is the outer layer of this one. And then it's time for the smaller bits and pieces I've got. I got some horsehair braid, or plastic horsehair braid, I don't know how it's called. But I think this can be useful for this project. Then I've got a whole bag of those hotfix rhinestones that I also got for this skirt, but they didn't arrive on time, and so I have a lot of them. In terms of stones and pearls and stuff like that we can put onto our project, I also have this little box. Those are all the rest pearls from the Estrella gown I made last year, and I just got them out because I think they could be very wintry as well. I think they also glitter a little bit like snow. So I already have a few ideas how we could use them. And so I think together with the rhinestones, or maybe only those pearls, can bring a little sparkle to our Frosty project. And so that's it in terms of a plan for this project. We have bigger pieces of fabric for a base. We have smaller pieces of fabric to add onto it in any way. We have the horsehair braid, the rhinestones and the pearls to add some sparkle to it and to make it as frosty as possible. And so I think we have more than enough to puzzle everything together and create a beautiful frosty project from it. Now that I'm thinking about it, it really feels a little bit like a puzzle game where you have to find all the little material bits or all the little clues hidden between a lot of stuff or other materials, and you have to pick the exact right one you need to get the clue to solve the puzzle or create the project. Maybe that's because I've been playing a lot of June's Journey recently, who's also the sponsor of today's video. June's Journey is a hidden object mystery game that's set in this glamorous 1920s world. It has that same vibe of searching for details and putting clues together, which is probably why my brain directly went into that direction. Let me show you what I mean. You play as June Parker, who's this sharp and curious amateur detective. She's trying to figure out what really happened to her sister. And as you go, you start to uncover all these hidden family secrets. One part of the game are those hidden object scenes. Each scene works a bit like this project. You're scanning for details, uncovering clues, and slowly pulling a bigger picture together. You really have to look closely. Everything you spot pushes the story forward. And when you're not investigating, there's this whole creative element of decorating your own island. I've been building mine up as I go, and arranging everything feels so satisfying. There are also rotating elements and seasonal moments that add extra challenges and rewards. For me, it's the perfect mix of relaxing and engaging, especially if I want a quick break from demanding projects. If you want to try it yourself, June's Journey is free to download. Use the link directly at the top of the description or scan this QR code. You can play it on iOS, Android and PC. Well, now that we've got a base plan for the project, let's try to come up with a design. First thing in terms of the design we know is that we have more than enough materials to create something frosty fitting the season. But since it is still not a lot, we are on the safer side if we make something like a cape and not a whole dress. So let's draw in a cape with a big hood and puffy sleeves as a base. I imagine the cape to go over the dress from the last video, so I would like to add some kind of color gradient at the bottom, maybe even in the form of some cracked eyes. To lean even more into the snowy theme, I want to add snow on top of the hood, so that the cape looks like you walked through a snowstorm wearing it. To have this appear more on the cape, I want to add long cuffs with snow on them as well, and top everything off by letting icicles hang from the hood and the cuffs. Now that we got our design set, we can start to create the pattern for the cape. Since it's going to be something wide and not form-fitting, I decided to drape the pattern. This is something I rarely do. I learned drafting my patterns flat, and so I like to use simpler projects like this to get used to more unfamiliar methods a bit more. At first I got out my fabric to drape and held it to the mannequin for a very rough drape, just to get a base idea of how to approach this, and also to determine how much fabric I'll need. The fabric is then prepared by ironing it. If it's not wrinkle-free, this could compromise the lines on the drape or at least make it more difficult once tracing the pattern. Then I pinned the fabric to the mannequin. I started with the front panel. Most lines of the square fabric piece could be used like this, and I only really had to cut a straight line for the side seam. With the bigger lines determined, I could start with the fine-tuning of the smaller parts, like the neck hole for example. The same was then done on the back. First bigger pieces pinned more roughly to the mannequin and then slowly cut it into shape. Once the side seam was pinned close and the armhole was determined, I moved on to draping the sleeve. First, I started with the long cuff and then I measured the armhole to cut a piece that would fit as the top of the sleeve. This was then also pinned to the mannequin to make sure the volume and length were fitting with the rest of the cape. I noted some final measurements for the length and with that had the cape already drafted. I didn't draft the hood for the cape since for this I already knew all the measurements I needed from previous capes I made. Drafting the cape pattern barely took me an afternoon and seeing the result on the mannequin made me really happy. I love the amount of fabric the cape holds, especially with the back compared to the front. Seeing it like this makes me want to sew it in other fabrics as well, maybe start with a heavy velvet for example. Even though the cape was pinned like I wanted it to look, I still had some work to do before having a finished pattern. For this I had to remove each piece from the mannequin, lay it on top of my pattern paper and carefully trace it. Even though the pieces were all easy to trace, mostly straight lines and simple forms, I still wanted to make it for me as clear as possible when working on the cape. So I made sure to add all the markings previously made on the fabric, as well as all the measurements for the length, since the pattern pieces are just the short part covering the torso, and the length will be added once laid on the fabric. But with only 4 pattern pieces to prepare, this was done really fast as well. With the pattern made, we can move on to cutting it from the tulle. I was 90% positive that there is just enough of the white tulle on the roll left to cut out all the bodice parts, so that was what I started with. Unrolling all the fabric, spreading it out on the cutting table as smooth as possible, and then cutting the bodice pieces from it. I used the pattern pieces to cut the top with the seam allowance added, and then mark the length of the pieces using my measuring tape and pins. This was done once for the back panel and 2 times for the front pieces. From the scraps left over from the bigger pieces, I could cut out all the small parts, starting with the cuffs. Since they were made from not 1 layer but 2 layers of tulle, I decided to base the shape of the pattern onto the tulle. This way I had the precise markings and both layers were connected securely and wouldn't shift in any way. The sleeves as well as the hood were prepared the same way, all made from 2 layers of the tulle. So all the pieces are cut and now it's time to experiment a little bit because I would like to start with the hood. And in order to create this snow effect on top, I have 2 ways I want to try it, once with the leftover chiffon and once with the leftover tulle. And so we have to try both ways and see which one we do or if we do a combination of both. I've never tried this kind of technique before, so before we can work on the real thing, we have to at least see if it works. Now the creative part can begin. Since I've never done anything like this, it was truly just trying and seeing where it would lead me. This was a fun contrast to the usual pattern making where I normally know all the steps. The only thing I knew was that I wanted to add puffy tulle onto the fabric, and to achieve this I wanted to have small strips of it that were tightly gathered. In my mind, this way I could build up volume and still create a lightweight texture that would look snow-like. I started with only a few pieces prepared so that I could create a small test batch. Here it's not really about the finer details, but to see if the overall idea even works before potentially spending hours on something that doesn't look the part. So I tested a little bit how I want to create the snow on the hood, and I came up with something I really like. It's this. It is a mixture of a little bit of tulle inside, also a little bit of horsehair braid inside to stiffen it up a little bit, and then some gathered tulle at the top, as well as some beads to give it a little bit of a sparkle. I also tried it with the silk chiffon. Like I said, I wanted to try both ways, but here I noticed pretty early that all of those threads that get loose when you cut the chiffon look weird, and also it's a pain to work with it. And also I think when you compare it, the tulle looks a little bit more brighter and a little bit more snow-like. So that's why I'm definitely going with the tulle and not with the chiffon. And now that I know how I want to make it, we can start to work on the hood. Like with the test batch, I prepared some tulle strips beforehand. For this, I ironed small pieces of the tulle scraps, making sure to have relatively long strips. Those are then folded double or until I have 4 tulle layers on top of each other. After pressing all edges so that everything stays flat, I secure all pieces by pinning them and then sew long strips of gathering seams using a big stitch on my sewing machine. For the right width, I used the presser foot as a guide. Even though the tulle strips are fairly small, I could get around 3 seams on each. Then I had to prepare the hood a little bit. Since it's also only 2 tulle layers, I decided to add a seam at the front just to make sure the fabric wouldn't stretch under the weight of all the added tulle later. So I just sewed a seam next to the folded edge, turned everything inside out and pressed it flat. It's a very subtle finish, but gives a bit more stability. Next up, I had to figure out where on the hood the snow would gather when wearing it. For this, I put it on and marked with some pins a rough outline of my head underneath. To then create a base for the snow, I got out some fabric scraps in a very light grayish blue. From this, I added 2 layers to the center of the hood between the 2 layers. Finally, just to be sure the delicate tulle can hold all the extra fabric added on top, I added a layer of horsehair braid as well. This was also cut a bit more wavy, so no straight edges would be visible at any time. This layer also added a bit more white to the center, which was a nice base for the white tulle added to it. After all layers are added, I closed the hood and prepared the tulle strips. I figured I could do all the gathering now so that when working on the hood I only have to add them. From every gathered tulle piece I also cut the excess gathering thread. Those ended up as a big pile of long threads, so I decided to use them as the thread to secure the tulle on the hood. Since this project was all about using resources I had and using them mindfully, this made me really happy. And once everything was prepared, I could finally start to add the tulle onto the hood. I started right at the center where I wanted the snow to be the most dense as well as voluminous, but after finishing only a small space I ran out of tulle really fast. I've got around 3/4 of the tulle snow done, I think, and I already ran out of those pieces. That's everything I've got left. And so this means I have to make a lot more. At least now I know, or I can estimate how much I have to make. Before I simply didn't know because I only made this small test batch. But now I have a better idea of how much tulle this actually needs. Luckily I have more than enough tulle scraps left to make more. So I think the last thing I'll do for today is to prepare those tulle pieces so that tomorrow I can hopefully finish the hood. I also started to try to soften it out towards the edges a little bit. This is a little bit too harsh for my taste. And I think even when it's on your head, you would have like a little bit less snow building up on the sides where it would fall down when you move. And so I try to sprinkle a little bit more of those snow bits towards the side. I intend to do this all around. I think I would like to achieve an even better gradient. I think you can clearly see the batches, and while I do like this, I think I would just switch it up so that it looks as organic as possible, and I see which parts I like most, and then I'll do them more than the other ones so that I'll get a little bit of switch up in between, and then I'll see how the whole hood looks. I already quite like it. It of course doesn't look like real snow, but I think it gives the snow vibe somehow when you look at it like this and then you imagine this is on the top of your head. I think it looks a little bit like it's snow on top. And then with the glass beads added as well, I think this will give the final sparkle that freshly fallen snow has. So I'm really happy so far, but I definitely have to make more of those tulle scraps. So let's go. When preparing the next batch of gathering tulle bits, I had also learned a bit better what exactly I needed. First, I prepared 2 layers over 4. When gathered, those looked a bit more delicate and were easier to place. And secondly, I made the width a bit smaller. Since I already had the center of the hood covered, all the other parts would need less volume, so I kept that in mind when preparing the gathered bits. I did try to have a bit of variation in the pieces though, so I had different batches prepared that had different densities and width. And with them I could spend the next morning adding snow to the hood of the cape. To add the tulle, I randomly pressed each bit to the cape, making sure to have it as dense as I liked, and then just sewed it directly to the hood. The good thing was that I didn't have to hide any seams because the thread would be almost invisible through the fluffy tulle, and so I could sew it down easily. This way I worked my way around the part already added the day before, adding bigger and smaller, looser and denser bits onto the hood. So the hood is almost done. I'm this far. I really like how it looks. Well, I think it also looks a little bit moldy. So maybe that's also a project idea, I don't know. But I think especially when I put it on my head and like have it at the right spots, it really looks like there's snow sitting on top of it. And so I'm really happy with how it turned out. At the beginning I only had like this part and it was really dense and I wasn't too sure if it would turn out how I imagined it, but now I'm really happy. The only thing I now want to do is add a little bit more of those smaller bits, like those here, just scatter them around the bottom a little bit more. I'm really happy with the top. I am not sure if I want to add a little bit more just at the center, because I think this is where the most snow would sit and so it would pile up a little bit more than on the sides. So maybe I'll do that too, but I'll definitely add those smaller bits. And then it's time to put on some of the beads. I think this will give this hood the last bit of the sparkle it needs to really look snowy and not like something moldy, hopefully. And so that's what we're going to do now. For the smaller snow piles on the side of the cape, I used the smallest tulle scraps that weren't gathered. I just cut pieces of different sizes, mostly around 1 or 2 centimeters wide and long. Those are then loosely crumbled together. I wanted to create small dots that were denser towards the middle and a bit flimsy on the outside, and then sewn onto the hood, scattered around the middle. This was so much fun that I had to force myself to stop at some point, otherwise I would have ended up with some kind of asymmetrical polka dot fabric. And with all the tulle added to the hood, I could finally start to add the beads. For this, I just secured the thread in the tulle and then picked up 1 or 2 beads with the needle, sewed through the tulle, and then continued this at a different place on the hood. This also helped keep all the previously added tulle in place, because with every added stitch this was secured to the base fabric more. Once finishing the hood, I was a bit sad because I really enjoyed the technique, but it wasn't too bad because I could directly continue this on the cuffs. The idea was to add it to every surface snow could gather on, so on the cuffs I decided to add the tulle at the bottom of it, where the falling snow could get stuck right on the wrist maybe. Again, I added the light grey tulle as a base and then proceeded to add the gathered tulle bits on top. Since I thought this would be a place where less tulle would gather, I made sure to only add smaller and looser bits compared to the hood before. Because of that and the smaller size of the pattern pieces, I got both cuffs ready really fast, so that in order to finish the sleeves I could now close the seam on those. To create a neat finish on the transparent tulle, I decided to use French seams. So after pinning the sides of the cuff wrong sides together, I sewed outside of the previously basted line and then cut away the excess fabric to only have a small seam allowance left. Then I had to turn the cuff inside out, which I tried to do as carefully as possible to not accidentally pull some of the gathered tulle loose. Then the actual seam can be closed. Ironing it was a bit difficult because of how narrow the cuffs are, but with the little help of my wooden board that I usually use to keep pressed seams flat while cooling down, this worked really well. Last step on the cuffs was then to turn them right side out again very carefully. And I couldn't help myself and had to try them on for the first time to see how the illusion actually comes together. Since the cuffs were ready now, I decided to completely finish the sleeves before moving on to the next task. For this, I first had to close the inseam of the upper part of the sleeves as well, again using French seams. After that, I added a gathering seam at the bottom and then pinned the cuff in the sleeve by dividing both pieces into even parts and pinning them together. And after pulling the gathering thread, I could sew everything in place. The last thing to do on each sleeve was to cut away all the excess fabric at the seam. Since I was already making so much progress on the actual cape, I directly moved on to sew both side seams of the cape together, again with French seams. This had to be done so that afterwards I would be able to work on the hem in one continuous piece and wouldn't risk any weird parts where both pattern pieces are sewn together. So initially I wanted to add the correct eyes effect at the bottom of the cape, but I have to admit I'm running out of time. I have like 2-ish days to sew the cape and I'm pretty sure this would take way longer. So I decided to completely focus on the snow details on the cape and on the sleeves. I also want to add them on the shoulders because this makes sense. If you're snowed in from the top, then you will have a little bit of snow on the shoulders as well. So I really want to focus on that and make it look as realistic as possible. And so I came up with the compromise for the hem. I decided to do it in a similar way like I did on last video's dress. So instead of cracked eyes, I'm just adding layers of darker tulle to create a little gradient. And hopefully when I wear the cape of the dress in the reveal, it will add up nicely and fit together in that way. And so this way I can finish this maybe later today, maybe tomorrow morning, and then afterwards completely focus on the snow. In moments like this, it's always a little bit sad that working with deadlines always means some kind of compromise, because you could always make a project grander and spend more time on it and do more details or even get lost in the details. I think it is part of the fun to have this little challenge to create a project in a certain time frame. However, I'm also a strong believer of being creative takes time and doing creative projects takes time. And so this also, while I do like the challenge, always breaks my heart a little bit. But I think with the compromise I found now, I'm really happy. I think it will suit the cape. It will probably even bring more focus on those other points that I'm already really happy with. And so this time I don't really mind it too much. With a set plan in mind for the hem, I directly started to prepare all the extra materials I needed. For this, I could use all the small tulle bits from the box I had. I picked out 2 different kinds of blue, the first one the grey blue from before, and the second one that was a bit darker and more saturated. And then it was time to iron, a lot. Since the tulle was pressed into the box for a long time, it was very wrinkly, but in order to pin it smoothly to the hem, I had to get it flat. And so I worked my way through all of the scraps, ironing them carefully. Then I could start pinning them on the hem. I went for 2 light layers and 2 dark layers, with the light layers being the biggest ones and the dark layers being very small and concentrated at the direct hem. I added them in 2 passes. First, 1 light and 1 dark layer all around the hem, and then again a light and dark layer on top. This way I created a smooth gradient that now only had to be permanently fixed to the cape. To do so, I first turned the cape around. The whole gradient was created from the back and is now secured from the front. For this I got out all the rhinestones. I had them in 2 different sizes. From both sizes I got out a few stones and placed them on the lid and then added them to the tulle. I made sure to place the stones in a way that all different sizes of layers would be secured, but also so that they created a little gradient, being denser at the bottom and less at the top. To make this even more visible, I placed more big stones at the bottom and more smaller stones at the top. When all the stones were secured, I shifted the cape a little and concentrated on the next part of the hem. This way I worked my way around the whole hem until everything was covered and all the tulle layers were secured. Now all parts of the cape are prepared and I could finally add all of them together. I started by closing the shoulder seams, again using French seams, and then adding the sleeves into the armscye. This was also done with French seams, but a little bit more complicated to do evenly, since now it wasn't just a straight seam. Once the sleeves were in, the cape already looked really cool and a bit ghostly. Then I added the hood. Since the part of the hood that will be attached to the cape is a lot longer, I had to gather it first. For this I added 2 gathering seams and then pinned the hood into the neck hole of the cape. Once it was pinned evenly, I could sew it in place. As a last step to finish the cape itself, I prepared a strip of fabric that will be added into the neckline as well. This not only serves to tie the hood in the front and close it this way, but also to cover the seam where the hood meets the neckline and helps that said place won't stretch under the weight of the hood. With this added, the whole cape was assembled and I could put it on the mannequin as a whole for the first time. Even though the cape itself is done, there are still a few things I want to add to it. First of all, I'm using the same technique as on the hood and cuffs to add a bit of snow on the shoulders. This, however, was a bit tricky, since it wasn't possible to do on a smooth surface, but had to be done directly on the mannequin. Once the base was built up on top of a layer of the grey tulle, as well as some horsehair braid for stability, I could sprinkle some smaller tulle bits around the upper part of the sleeve, as well as front and back. And then finally I could use the drop-shaped beads to create small icicles. For this I just removed them from their base, making sure to not only put the big beads aside but also save the smaller ones. Then I sewed the drop beads onto the underside of the sleeves right side down, securing them with a small round bead at the top. I varied the placement and height to give the look of different sized icicles, before finally adding a few of them at the front edge of the hood as well. This was the last step before the Frosty cape was finally done. Before I show you the final reveal, I want to recap a little bit about this project, how it turned out, especially in terms of if I managed to use up fabric scraps, the whole idea of making one piece from a lot of different other materials worked out, and how I feel about the results. I'm so happy with the outcome of the cape, but the overall question is the goal of this project achieved? Maybe you remember that in the beginning of the video I said that I wanted to try to make a whole project from different bits and pieces that I had left from other projects that wouldn't be enough for a whole one in itself, and I think I definitely achieved that. In the end I didn't even use the dark blue tulle, where I wasn't too sure if it would count because I still had so much of it, and I really only used scraps that wouldn't be usable for other projects. I wasn't so successful in emptying the toolbox. It still looks completely full, even though I took out quite a bit of fabric, but I could completely use up the leftover white tulle that I had. I could cut the whole big cape pieces from it and then had just enough for the small cape pieces, and then all the tiny scraps could be used for the snow parts. So in this case I was really successful. So we achieved that I don't have a lot of scrap fabrics laying around anymore, but now I have a tulle cape laying around. So I have no idea what to do with it, but we'll see, I guess. Let's talk about it a little bit. I really like how this snowy texture looks. I think this turned out really nice when thinking about how easy it was to do. It's just tulle, just gathered and then stitched to a fabric. And when you think about it, it was so easy, and I'm really happy with the outcome. I also really like how the hem turned out. Since like the last project was basically only focused on something like this, I had a little bit of experience. So I had learned quite a lot before how to approach this in the right way. So I didn't make all the mistakes I made on the skirt. So one thing that improved, for example, is that all the different layers are really secured on the white outside, which I thought would maybe not be possible because at some places I had to like secure 4, 5, 6 layers on top of each other, and that still worked fine. So I'm really happy with that. In terms of the time frame, like I said, I wasn't able to do the Frosty hem, which is a little bit sad, but I also wasn't able to make self-made icicles. I had in mind to make them from the horsehair braid and then cover them with tulle and also with beads. So I would be able to add not only those smaller ones, but also bigger ones that I would make myself, and then I have a little bit of variety. So that's a little bit sad that I couldn't make this, but I really like the cape like it is, and I don't think it's missing anything, so this isn't too bad, I guess. Then seeing the cape over the dress I made in the last video, I thought this would be the ultimate winter wedding outfit. I think it looks so whimsical, so fairy tale-like. It gives me huge Narnia vibes, which I love. And so wearing it felt very nice. So overall, I'm definitely really happy with how it turned out. I think I don't have any more to say. So now let's watch the reveal. Thank you for following along this year, for watching my videos and being here on this creative journey. If you watched this far, consider liking the video, subscribing or leaving a comment. This always helps a lot. Also a huge thank you to June's Journey again for sponsoring this video. If you're in the mood for some cozy detective work, make sure to check out June's Journey using the QR code or the link in the description. And now I don't have any more to say, so see you in the next year.